Focus on Syria for a moment and Raqqa, where the fight against ISIS is focused in Syria. When do you expect the fight to actually enter the city?
Well, we expect to go in by summertime. There's still a tremendous amount of clearing work to be done in the countryside that surrounds Raqqa. What we're doing is isolating the city so that the enemy can't resupply or reposition their fighters or infiltrate, or worse yet, send attacks out into Europe and other places around the world. So Raqqa has been a center that the enemy has used for command and control of attacks around the globe. What we're doing is we're putting a stop to their ability to do that before we move in.
Take us through some of the unique challenges there so far, because we're talking about a city that's much smaller than Mosul in Iraq, but where victory has eluded all the forces fighting so far.
Well, you know, it's a very difficult situation because the enemy has been entrenched there for nearly 3 years. They've had a chance to dig elaborate defenses, booby traps, berms, all the types of things that you would expect to see. We've seen that in Mosul as the Iraqi security forces moved in. It's very dangerous, difficult, slow, and incremental fighting. And unfortunately, one of the things that we've seen is the enemy pulls the civilians that are living in the area into harm's way. It's really an unprecedented level of that type of activity, and it's heartbreaking to see it.
So you mentioned the process of isolating the city that's underway now. When the actual assault does begin, perhaps in summer, as you say, how many ground troops do you think will actually be needed to defeat ISIS in that city?
Well, you know, we're still working through that with our partnered force. So our force is going to be very, very small. These are just special operations troops, and then some extra troops that are there to provide artillery support and perhaps some helicopters and that sort of thing. Our partners will have a much larger force. It'll be a primarily Arab force, since Raqqa is a primarily Arab city, and it really helps when the force that goes in to liberate the city reflects the population of those who are being liberated.
We know that there are about 400 U.S. Marines that were sent in outside of the city for the first time. Are we talking about in addition to those Marines? Give us a little bit of a sense of what we can expect.
No, we're not going to speculate about additional forces moving into Syria. I think we have what we need in order to do the isolation. And again, the preponderance of the fighting is going to be done by our partner force in Syria. They've proven very reliable and very effective in rolling back ISIS territorial gains. They've taken back more than 30% of the territory in Syria, and in Iraq, well over 60%.
Do you think that ISIS can be defeated in Syria, let's start with that first, without a substantial presence of ground troops wherever they might come from?
Well, there's going to be a pretty substantial number of troops that are involved. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of Arab and multi-ethnic troops that are going to move into the city. It's going to take quite a bit of a force to dislodge them from the dense urban terrain that's in Raqqa. Again, they've had a chance to dig elaborate defenses there. It's going to be very difficult and dangerous fighting.
Any sense of how long that fight will take?
Well, we'll get it done as quickly as we can. It's really more important that we do all we can to protect innocent civilian life. We don't want to create too much collateral damage. This is something that we can mitigate as a problem, but it's very difficult to solve it. The only thing that you can do to solve the issue is to get the enemy out of there. They pull civilians into harm's way. They try to create a situation that's very dangerous in order to slow the advance of our partnered forces. It's something that we have to work through. The coalition, for our part, we use only precision-guided munitions for our airstrikes. We select the munitions that we use so that we're very careful about creating collateral damage and civilian casualties.
In terms of civilian casualties or otherwise, about 200,000 civilians are believed to be in Raqqa now. When that assault begins, is there a plan for what to do with those civilians who will, I assume, have to be pushed out of the city during the fight?
Well, we'll see how that plays out. There will be an international community effort to support the civilians who are displaced by the fighting. There are already millions of people in both Iraq and Syria who have either been displaced within those countries or moved into other countries nearby to escape the fighting. This is, you know, the hallmark of this enemy tens of thousands of people have been slaughtered and millions have been driven from their homes. So we really have to work very closely with the international community to set conditions, pre-position humanitarian aid supplies, and then move in and take care of this enemy.
Colonel Dorrian, we saw the so-called mother of all bombs yesterday, the most powerful conventional bomb in the American arsenal, dropped on an ISIS complex in Afghanistan. Earlier today, we heard from Commander of U.S. Forces in Afghanistan who was speaking out in Kabul. Let's hear a little bit of what he said there.
This was the right weapon against this target. The enemy had created bunkers, tunnels, and extensive minefields. And this weapon was used to reduce those obstacles so that we could continue our offensive into southern Nangarhar. And this weapon was very effective in that use. And our soldiers on the ground, our Afghan commandos, our special forces are on the site now, and the weapon achieved its intended purpose.
Colonel Dorrian, is that a weapon you can envision being used, being effective in the fight against ISIS in Iraq or in Syria?
Well, I'm not going to speculate as to whether we would use it in Iraq and Syria. It was the right weapon for that very remote location up in the mountains of Nangarhar province in Afghanistan. We'll have to wait and see if it becomes necessary to use one somewhere else. But I'm not going to speculate on that.
All right, so briefly, I want to talk Russia. We heard a big dispute between Russia and the United States this week, obviously, over the American strikes, but both say that fighting ISIS is a top priority. What exactly is the cooperation or coordination between the U.S. and Russia in Syria?
Well, we have previously had a deconfliction channel that we were using. That's something that we've pulled away from discussing, and the reason for that is it was used as a matter for safety of flight. It really wasn't productive to go live with what those discussions were, the content of those discussions. I can say that we are satisfied that both Russia and our forces are conducting themselves safely, and they are focused on the defeat of ISIS.
Colonel John Dorrian in Baghdad, thanks very much for weighing in.